The chamber is electric before a single word is spoken. Rows of cameras point like arrows toward the witness table, their red lights blinking, broadcasting every breath to a nation already on edge. Outside the glass walls, protesters hold signs high, their chants muffled but insistent, a heartbeat against the marble floors. Inside, senators shuffle papers, clear throats, and adjust microphones, but no one's eyes leave the two women at the center of the storm. One sits rigid and poised, her blazer a muted armor. The other leans forward, jaw tight, eyes bright with the heat of 1,000 unspoken truths. A voice cuts through the tension, clipped, polished, but carrying a sting like salt on an open wound. Perhaps Representative Crockett should remember, it echoes, that public service is a privilege earned, not inherited. A low gasp ripples across the chamber, and the cameras zoom in, one after another, like predators sensing a wound. Social media explodes instantly. Hashtags crawl across screens, live tweets fire off, and millions of viewers clutch their phones, stunned. For a second, time holds its breath. The insult isn't just personal, it's generational, coded, and unmistakable. Staffers glance nervously at their bosses. Some lean back as though witnessing an accident about to happen. Others lean in, eager for the collision. Crockett's hands tighten on the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening, but her eyes, calm, unblinking, track her opponent with surgical precision. Across the country, living rooms flicker with the scene. Immigrant families at kitchen tables pause their meals. Students stream it between classes. Activists whisper to each other, "Did she really say that?" The line cuts deep into the country's shared conversation about who belongs and who gets to speak. Crockett exhales slowly. The cameras catch every movement, the shift of her shoulders, the flicker of a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. In that instant, the energy flips. It's no longer a hearing, it's a reckoning. She's not just sitting for herself, but for every voice once silenced, every name once mocked. And as the room tilts toward her, a single question hangs in the air, trembling like a live wire. What will she say next?
Long before the cameras rolled and the insult ricocheted across the chamber, the path of this moment had been paved with months of escalating tension. Behind the headlines and the polite smiles on Sunday talk shows, a fierce contest of vision had been unfolding, one rooted in who gets to define the nation's character and who is left outside the frame. This wasn't simply another political skirmish. It was a fight over the very meaning of public service in a country still reckoning with its promises and its betrayals. The stakes were high because the policies under debate touched lives in the most intimate ways: citizenship pathways, voting rights, access to representation. For immigrant families watching from kitchen tables, these weren't abstract issues, but questions of belonging, safety, and dignity. The senator's remark, seemingly casual but laced with dismissal, had been months in the making, a crescendo of dog whistles, subtle digs, and attempts to frame progress as overreach. And yet here sat Representative Crockett, steady and unbowed, embodying the counter-narrative of resilience and earned legitimacy. Beyond the walls of the chamber, the country's mood had shifted. Social feeds overflowed with viral clips of everyday people telling their own stories of sacrifice and service. Editorials framed the committee hearing as a microcosm of the national debate: integrity versus opportunism, duty versus entitlement. Activists described it as the front line of democracy, a phrase that clung to the moment like static electricity. Even those who normally tuned out politics sensed that this confrontation would echo beyond the day's headlines. Inside, the air itself seemed charged. Staffers scribbled notes for possible press releases. Journalists refreshed their notifications, eyes darting between the senators and their phones. Everyone felt it, the weight of a clash that could tilt public opinion, redefine reputations, and even influence legislation still under negotiation. Crockett's supporters had whispered for weeks about her readiness, her patience, her ability to play the long game. Her detractors assumed she'd snap or retreat. Both camps now waited to see which version of her would emerge. It wasn't just Crockett and her opponent facing off. It was a symbolic collision between two Americas. One believed power is inherited, concentrated, and protected. The other insisted it can be earned, shared, and expanded. In a time of deep political fatigue, the spectacle of authenticity versus performance promised something rare, a real moment of moral clarity, unfiltered and unforgettable. Across the country, phones buzzed with push alerts. Clips from the chamber looped on television screens in airports, gyms, and corner stores. Hashtags multiplied as viewers debated in real time. People who had never heard of either lawmaker before suddenly had strong opinions. It felt like the curtain lifting on a play everyone thought they knew, only to realize a new act was about to begin. And then came the whispers from insiders. Crockett had prepared evidence, stories, and a rhetorical strike that could flip the narrative in seconds. Even her closest allies hadn't seen the full scope of what she planned to reveal. Her senator across from her had no idea what was coming. All of this built to a single, inescapable truth. This was no longer a hearing. It was a stage where the nation's ideals would be tested live before millions of witnesses. Integrity versus opportunism, service versus spectacle, dignity versus dismissal. And yet, as the tension reached its peak, Crockett's eyes held a calm fire. The faintest trace of a smile flickered at the corners of her mouth, a signal to anyone watching closely that she was not simply enduring the attack, she was poised to redefine the entire exchange. What happens next will change everything.
Long before the cameras immortalized her sharp remark, the senator's rise had been built on a polished image. The composed stateswoman, the steady hand from a storied family, the person who knew how Washington worked. Yet behind that veneer lived a far more complicated reality. She had inherited her seat not only through elections, but also through decades of family connections, patronage networks, and carefully managed narratives. For years, she spoke about merit and earning one's place, but in private circles, she leveraged backroom deals and insider favors to keep her grip on power. A montage of past statements flickers like an old film reel, her praising immigrant workers at a town hall in one clip, then dismissing refugee protections as too generous in another. Headlines from a decade ago show her standing with reformers on voting access. A year later, she votes to restrict it. Through it all, she mastered the art of positioning herself as a moderate, as someone who listens to all sides, while quietly ensuring the spoils flowed to her donors and allies. In her early years on the Hill, she built a reputation for composure, but also for cutting down those who challenged her. Staffers tell hushed stories of late-night calls where she threatened to strip funding from projects unless local leaders fell in line. She was not without talent. Her ability to read a room, sense public mood, and adjust her rhetoric was almost surgical. But that same skill made her contradictions impossible to ignore once the internet began archiving everything. Clips resurfaced. Old quotes gained new relevance. Her double dealing became a matter of public record, not just whispered rumor. The public began to see a pattern. Whenever dignity and inclusion were on the line, she positioned herself as the arbiter, yet found ways to slow walk or water down actual reforms. When a bipartisan immigration bill passed out of committee, she quietly inserted provisions making it harder for naturalized citizens to access certain benefits. When challenged about voting rights, she invoked procedural rules to stall, then claimed her hands were tied. She often spoke of American values, but her votes and maneuvers favored consolidation of power over expansion of opportunity. Yet, like any seasoned operator, she knew how to cast herself as the reluctant villain. She smiled on camera, invoked her father's service, and told stories of growing up in a modest home far from the halls of power. But even that story had holes. Journalists uncovered that the modest home was in one of the wealthiest enclaves in her state. Her first job waiting tables turned out to be a brief summer internship arranged through a family friend. These inconsistencies might have sunk a lesser politician, but she weathered them with a certain unflappable charm, always turning the conversation back to her opponent's supposed flaws. As the committee hearing approached, she had already begun maneuvering to frame the day as her triumph. Advisors urged restraint. She wanted spectacle. They drafted neutral remarks. She added the sting. She saw the confrontation with Representative Crockett as an opportunity to assert dominance, to remind the party faithful and the media that she could still land a punch. In her mind, Crockett was a newcomer. Articulate, yes, but lacking the muscle memory of old Washington battles. A few well-placed barbs, she thought, would box the younger lawmaker into a corner. But she underestimated two things. First, the moment was no longer hers to control. The cameras, the live streams, the citizen journalists on social media, they created a parallel arena where authenticity trumped seniority. Second, she misjudged her opponent's preparation. Crockett had spent years absorbing attacks, honing her responses, and building a quiet but fierce coalition of allies who shared her values. In the days before the hearing, the senator's contradictions came back into focus. She gave an interview about defending democracy, even as watchdog groups highlighted her ties to lobbyists working to undermine voting rights. She tweeted about lifting up working families while voting down a minimum wage increase. Commentators began calling her approach the velvet hammer, polite in tone, devastating in effect. Yet beneath that veneer of control, anxiety brewed. Poll numbers dipped. Constituents started asking harder questions at town halls. Editorial boards, once friendly to her, turned skeptical. Cinematically, it is as if the film cuts between her calm public appearances and the mounting evidence of her power plays. Private jets, closed-door fundraisers, and the quiet reshuffling of staff after a damaging leak. Her narrative of earned service now looked increasingly like inherited privilege guarded by opportunism. And still, she prepared her remarks for the committee room, believing one more sharp line could shore up her image, dismiss the upstart across from her, and remind the country who held the gavel. She rehearsed the insult, adjusted the inflection, and practiced the timing so it would land just as the cameras swung toward her. But while she was plotting her next move, the quiet counterforce was preparing.
Long before Representative Crockett sat beneath the glare of the committee lights, her story was being written in places where the cameras rarely go. It began in a cramped apartment on the edge of a bustling immigrant neighborhood where the scent of home-cooked meals mixed with the sounds of multiple languages echoing through thin walls. Her parents arrived in the United States with little more than a suitcase, an address scribbled on a scrap of paper, and a belief that dignity was something you carried with you, not something anyone else could bestow. They worked night shifts in warehouses and diners, piecing together enough to send their children to public schools and Sunday programs. From a young age, Crockett absorbed the rhythms of resilience. She translated forms for her parents before she could drive, interpreted at doctor's visits, and helped neighbors navigate City Hall. She learned, not from textbooks, but from lived experience, how systems can empower and also exclude. When classmates teased her for her accent or her lunchbox, she responded with a stubborn calm that became her trademark. Teachers remember her as the girl who would stay after class to debate them about civic duty, always respectful but never yielding. Her first brush with public life came at a high school rally for workers' rights, where she held a sign taller than herself and found her voice echoing through a borrowed megaphone. The image appeared in the local paper, a teenager with determined eyes demanding fairness for janitors and cafeteria staff. That photo became a talisman she kept taped inside her notebook through college. While friends chased internships on Wall Street, she pursued community organizing and legal clinics. She understood policy not as an abstraction, but as a lifeline for the people she loved. Crockett's college years were a test of endurance. She balanced full-time coursework with part-time jobs, often sending part of her paycheck home. Professors saw brilliance. She saw obligation. When she interned in the state legislature, she was often mistaken for an assistant or a constituent, but she stayed late into the night, drafting proposals and reading bill language. It was during one of those late nights that she wrote her first op-ed calling for expanded pathways to citizenship, an essay that would later circulate widely online and introduce her to a new network of allies. Her leap into electoral politics came almost by accident. After years of legal aid work and neighborhood advocacy, local leaders urged her to run for city council. She resisted at first, the spotlight, the fundraising, the inevitable attacks, but she also saw how decisions were being made without voices like hers at the table. She launched her campaign with a borrowed folding table, a volunteer list scribbled on loose-leaf paper, and a conviction that authenticity could beat money. She knocked on thousands of doors, listened more than she spoke, and built a coalition across divides. Against all predictions, she won. On the city council, Crockett distinguished herself with her meticulous preparation and quiet persistence. She championed wage protections, fought predatory lending practices, and created language access programs for public services. She earned a reputation for showing up at community meetings long after the cameras had left. Reporters began to describe her as unflappable, data-driven but human, and the rising voice of a new generation. Yet she never shed the habits forged in her youth, calling her mother after late-night votes, cooking Sunday meals for volunteers, and walking neighborhoods without staff to reconnect with constituents. When an open congressional seat emerged, she faced the dilemma that defines so many barrier breakers: stay in the safe lane or risk everything for a bigger platform. She chose risk. Her opponent outspent her 5-1, deploying negative ads and whisper campaigns questioning her loyalty and experience. She responded not with counterattacks, but with town halls, door knocks, and policy explainers. The underdog narrative resonated, especially among young voters and immigrant communities hungry for authentic representation. When she won, it wasn't just a personal victory, it was a signal that the old playbook could be rewritten. In Washington, Crockett carried her organizing instincts into the halls of power. She joined committees most lawmakers avoided, dove into complex legislative issues, and built unlikely alliances. Colleagues noted how she read every page of every bill, how she came armed with stories from constituents, and how she maintained a direct line to community groups back home. She also faced relentless scrutiny, coded comments about her background, doubts about her qualifications, and condescension masked as mentorship. Through it all, she held the same steady demeanor she learned as a child translating for her parents. Listen, absorb, respond with clarity. Her preparation for this particular hearing went beyond policy. She revisited case files, studied procedural rules, and rehearsed her arguments late into the night. But more than that, she centered herself on the larger meaning of the moment. This wasn't simply about rebutting an insult or winning a soundbite. It was about demonstrating that dignity can outlast cynicism, that someone from an overlooked background could navigate the system without losing their core. Crockett's journey also left her uniquely equipped for the theater of a public confrontation. She understood the power of silence, of letting a remark hang in the air before responding. She knew how to frame her words to resonate beyond the room, to signal to the millions watching that they were part of the story too. Her calm under fire was not an accident, but a discipline honed over years of being underestimated. All those hardships, the sacrifices, the breakthroughs, they weren't separate chapters, but a single arc bending toward this day. The committee room was just another stage, but the stakes had never been higher. She was no longer the young girl translating at a clinic, nor the city councilwoman knocking on doors. She was a congressional leader poised to redefine the terms of debate. As she sat beneath the glare of the lights, recalling her parents' words about dignity and courage, the past and present fused. She could feel the weight of every hand that had lifted her, every neighbor who had believed in her, every volunteer who had stood in the rain to hand out flyers. The sense of preparation was almost physical, a calm hum beneath her skin, an awareness that the next few minutes could ripple for years. All those years of struggle were about to converge in one electrifying moment.
The air inside the committee chamber felt heavier now, as if the oxygen itself had been replaced by anticipation. The first volley had already been fired, that barbed remark echoing online, but everyone sensed it was only the opening round. C-SPAN cameras rolled in relentless close-up. Photographers jostled for better angles, their shutters snapping like small explosions. Even the senators, who normally scrolled through phones, now leaned forward, eyes flicking between the two women who had become the center of a national drama. The senator's voice came again, sharper this time, tinged with the steel of a practiced prosecutor. She accused Representative Crockett of playing identity politics, of using personal background as a shield from criticism. Each line landed like a dart, rehearsed and calculated, designed to provoke. Staffers behind her nodded on cue, hoping their boss's jab would clip and trend in the evening news cycle. Crockett listened, hands folded neatly in front of her, a picture of stillness. Her expression barely shifted. Only a slight tilt of the head, the kind a chess player makes before moving a decisive piece. Her silence seemed to expand the room, making the senator's voice echo more harshly. Social media commentators began posting side-by-side clips, one woman leaning forward, brows furrowed, jabbing the air with her pen, the other sitting still, gaze steady, her calmness more cutting than any insult. Then came the escalation. The senator invoked Crockett's voting record, twisting a nuanced amendment into a claim of hypocrisy. She brought up rumors circulated by fringe blogs, hinting at impropriety without evidence. She leaned heavily on phrases like real Americans and traditional values, her tone rising with each point. Across the room, aides exchanged nervous glances. They knew the optics. Every time the senator raised her voice, Crockett's composure shone brighter. Crockett finally spoke, her voice low but resonant. She didn't defend point by point. She reframed. She reminded the committee of the actual legislation at stake, of the families who would feel the impact, of the promises inscribed in the nation's founding documents. Her words landed with a quiet force, the kind that doesn't spike the microphone but lingers in the listener's chest. Viewers online began hashtagging calm versus chaos, their feeds filling with screenshots of Crockett's steady gaze contrasted with the senator's flushed face. Back in the chamber, tension climbed like a rising tide. The senator leaned even closer to the mic, searching for an attack that would land. She rattled off statistics, half-true and cherry-picked, waving papers in the air as though volume could substitute for credibility. Her voice cracked on a line she'd practiced, a fissure that camera lenses zoomed in to capture. Meanwhile, the audience behind the velvet rope became a Greek chorus of gasps and murmurs. A young intern covered his mouth as if to hold in disbelief. A veteran journalist scribbled "meltdown" in the margins of her notebook. The sound of a single cough echoed like a gunshot in the quiet between exchanges. Every pause stretched longer, amplifying the drama. Crockett remained immovable. When she did speak, it was in measured, deliberate sentences, each beginning with the senator's name and ending with a return to principle. She never raised her voice, never let her rhythm be broken. That restraint only intensified the sense of inevitability, as if an invisible clock were ticking toward a reveal no one could yet see. Social feeds swelled with commentary. She's unflappable. This is a masterclass in composure. Watch her face when the senator tries to interrupt. Iconic. Commentators on live streams began whispering about the moment they sensed was coming, something that could flip the narrative in a single stroke. By now, the senator's frustration had become visible, a flush creeping up her neck, a tremor in her pen. She interrupted Crockett mid-sentence, only to be politely reclaimed with, "If I may finish." A collective murmur rippled through the room. The senator shuffled her notes, reached for water, but her hand trembled slightly as she replaced the glass. All the while, Crockett's allies in the back row exchanged subtle nods. They knew the power of letting an opponent self-destruct. They could see the storyline forming, not just in the chamber, but in the minds of millions watching. A clash between entitlement and earned presence, between bluster and focus. And then, just as the senator reached for one more line, the one she hoped would define the day, Crockett straightened in her chair, she placed her hands flat on the table and leaned forward slightly. Her eyes locked on her opponent's. The room seemed to contract, every conversation halting mid-whisper, every phone raised a little higher. And then came the words that silenced the room.
The chamber held its breath. Crockett had been patient, letting the senator flail, letting the words hang in the air like a thick fog. Now, the moment she had prepared for months arrived. She inhaled quietly, a small, almost imperceptible pause that carried the weight of anticipation. The senator leaned forward, ready to seize the next beat, to jab with another line meant to humiliate. But Crockett's eyes were steady, her voice calm, measured, and deliberate. "Let's review the facts," she began, and the quiet snap of her first words sliced through the tension. She referenced legislation by name, quoting clauses and dates with precision. A journalist in the back row leaned forward, pen trembling over her notebook. Viewers at home paused their scrolling, sensing that the performance they had anticipated was transforming into something far more consequential. Crockett cited funding allocations, amendments she had introduced, and bipartisan votes she had brokered, all evidence that not only refuted the senator's attacks, but exposed inconsistencies in her record. The senator opened her mouth to interject. Crockett let her. She didn't falter, didn't raise her voice. Instead, she continued, weaving context and human consequence into her argument. She told the stories of families impacted by legislation, of immigrant workers navigating complex systems, of children whose futures hung in the balance. Each anecdote wasn't a digression, it was a hammer, driving home the principle that policy affects lives, and that leadership demands both knowledge and empathy. The cameras caught every beat. A bead of sweat appeared on the senator's temple. Staffers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Crockett's calmness only magnified the tension, and social media began tracking the exchange in real time. Clips of her meticulous delivery, juxtaposed with the senator's increasingly animated gestures, circulated immediately. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Crockett Clarity. Hashtag Dignity versus Arrogance. Analysts noted how her composure amplified every word, how her pauses punctuated the chaos with the authority of someone who had earned the room's attention. Then came the first revelation, a carefully curated document she placed before the committee, its contents meticulously referenced. The room leaned in. The senator's confident smirk faltered. Crockett pointed to a discrepancy in public statements, a pattern of misrepresentation that contradicted the senator's earlier claims. She did not mock, she did not raise her voice. She allowed the evidence to speak. The microphones carried the silence that followed, heavier than any insult could have been. Crockett paused, letting the weight of truth settle. The gallery behind her murmured softly, some audibly exhaling in surprise. Members of the media scribbled furiously. The senator's aides exchanged panicked glances. The room was no longer debating policy. It was witnessing a reckoning. Every carefully prepared barb the senator had intended to land now seemed irrelevant, almost juvenile. The contrast was stark. One figure unraveling under scrutiny, the other poised, deliberate, unflinching. She shifted to her second line of attack, not personal, but structural. Charts, timelines, and references to historical precedent painted a picture of consistent leadership, integrity, and advocacy for the underserved. Each point methodically dismantled the senator's narrative, exposing hypocrisy with an almost cinematic rhythm. Crockett's voice grew only slightly, enough to underscore a crescendo, but never loud enough to seem unmeasured. The room responded in kind, a few stunned gasps, whispers, the rustle of notes as senators absorbed the gravity of her argument. Every revelation was met with a reaction, a hand tightening on a notebook, a jaw clenching, a pause long enough to feel the tension stretch. Crockett's team watched from the back, nodding discreetly, aware that the meticulously rehearsed rebuttal was landing with perfection. Social media continued to surge. Memes now depicted Crockett as a calm lighthouse amid a storm, while the senator was rendered as flailing and unmoored. Live streams looped segments, showing the stark contrast, poised authority versus desperate theatrics. Then came the third blow, the one Crockett had saved for the moment of maximum effect. She produced correspondence, internal memos, and public statements that directly contradicted the senator's narrative on policy positions, campaign promises, and votes. The chamber collectively leaned forward, as if pulled by the gravity of truth itself. The senator's composure cracked in ways impossible to ignore. A throat cleared awkwardly, fingers drumming nervously on the table, a gaze darting to advisors for silent guidance that did not come. Crockett's crescendo was as precise as a conductor's final note. She told a short, simple story, one family, one human consequence, connecting the abstract legislative points to real life. The senator's defense fell silent. For once, no talking points could shield her from the weight of evidence paired with humanity. The audience felt it. The gallery felt it. The millions watching online felt it. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the unspoken acknowledgement. The moral arc had tilted. She concluded by returning to principle. She said, "Leadership," she said, voice steady and unwavering, "is not measured by inherited privilege or clever rhetoric. It is measured by action, integrity, and the courage to represent all Americans, especially those who are most often overlooked." The words resonated like a bell in the chamber. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to applause. The senator slumped slightly in her chair, the facade of control eroding with every heartbeat. Even the media sensed the shift. Analysts paused their monologues mid-sentence, replaying the key moments. Hashtags surged into trending charts worldwide. Journalists live tweeting the hearing added context. Unflappable, methodical, ruthlessly effective. Across platforms, ordinary viewers expressed the same sentiment. A surge of validation, a sense of justice momentarily restored in a landscape so often dominated by ego and spectacle. Crockett allowed herself one quiet breath, the smallest exhalation of relief and resolve. Her face remained composed, but her eyes flicked briefly to the senator, registering the shift in power, the collapse of the bluster that had dominated the opening exchanges. Social feeds were already ablaze with commentary, analysis, and praise. Opinion pieces were drafted in real time. Clips circulated, recirculated, and were remixed, cementing the moment as a defining instant not just for the hearing, but for her rising trajectory. Even within the chamber, the audience's reaction was cinematic. Gasps, murmurs and subtle nods of acknowledgement. The senator's aides whispered frantically. She gestured, but her voice no longer carried authority. Crockett had not yelled, she had not berated, yet the effect was undeniable. She had dismantled the narrative with patience, poise, and overwhelming evidence. And just as the chamber began to register the full impact of the rebuttal, the story's resonance expanded beyond the room. Tweets were shared, reposted, and threaded with commentary from activists, pundits, and educators. The moment was no longer confined to the hearing. It was living online, in living rooms, in classrooms, and across social media feeds, forming a narrative that would dominate headlines for days. But the shockwaves didn't stop inside the room.
The moment Representative Crockett's words struck, the chamber went silent, but the digital world erupted. Within seconds, the clip of her response was circulating across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and every corner of the internet where people congregate to witness history. Hashtags appeared like sparks from a firework. Hashtag calm versus chaos. Hashtag dignity wins. Hashtag Crockett mic drop. Memes flooded timelines before the hearing had even adjourned. One showed Crockett sitting serenely as the senator's words bounced off like rubber arrows. Another remixed her measured retort over a beat, turning it into an anthem for weekend rallies. Newsrooms scrambled to adjust their headlines. What began as a routine committee meeting was now framed as the moment the power dynamic flipped. On cable news, split screens displayed Crockett's poised expression beside the senator's flushed, faltering delivery. Anchors replayed the exchange in slow motion, analyzing tone, posture, even the flicker of a smile at the corner of Crockett's mouth. Panelists debated whether they had just witnessed the emergence of a new national leader. The ripple effect extended beyond politics. Within hours, celebrities with millions of followers were weighing in. A chart-topping singer tweeted, "That's how you do it, grace under fire." A beloved actor posted a still from the hearing with the caption, "Dignity greater than hate." Grassroots organizers reported a surge of sign-ups and donations, crediting Crockett's performance with inspiring them to re-engage. Even late-night comedians rushed to draft sketches, sensing a cultural moment too sharp to ignore. Meanwhile, the senator's team scrambled to control the damage. They released a statement insisting her comments were taken out of context and accusing Crockett of performative outrage. But screenshots of her exact words were everywhere. The internet's collective memory had archived every frame, making spin nearly impossible. Hashtags mocking the senator's statement trended for days. Political cartoonists sharpened their pens, portraying her as rattled, out of touch, and overshadowed. Editorial boards published op-eds dissecting the confrontation. One called it a masterclass in composure, and another dubbed it the day dignity punched back. A prominent columnist wrote that Crockett had reframed the national conversation from fear to fairness, and an immigration rights journal hailed her as a new beacon for a diverse America. Think pieces multiplied, each trying to define what the moment meant, who won, and what it revealed about power, privilege, and public service. Across kitchen tables, community centers, and college dorms, people replayed the clip and narrated their own reactions. "She said what we'd been feeling," one commenter under a viral post said. "Finally, someone refused to let them belittle us." Parents showed the clip to their children as an example of composure under pressure. Social science professors integrated it into their lectures about leadership and representation. Activists launched digital campaigns encouraging people to run for local office, framing Crockett's moment as a call to action rather than a one-off spectacle. At the same time, pollsters detected a measurable shift in public perception. Crockett's approval rating spiked, even among independents who had never heard of her before. Donors flooded her campaign with small-dollar contributions, often accompanied by notes saying, "For dignity," or "For my daughter." The senator's numbers, by contrast, dipped sharply.
Once viewed as untouchable, she now faced primary whispers and calls for resignation from some of her own allies. The hearing had become a turning point, not just in narrative, but in political math. The hearing's aftershocks also reverberated inside Congress. Lawmakers began citing Crockett's remarks in floor speeches. Staffers passed around transcripts as models of clarity and control. Behind closed doors, strategists reevaluated how to engage with a generation of lawmakers who wielded authenticity as effectively as policy. The traditional power calculus, seniority, committee assignments, donor networks, suddenly felt fragile next to a viral moment of moral authority. For immigrant families watching at home, the effect was deeply personal. They saw in Crockett's measured tone and unwavering eye contact a validation of their own struggles with bias and invisibility. Social media became a confessional space where people posted their migration stories alongside the clip, saying they felt seen for years. Community leaders organized watch parties and discussion groups, turning a political exchange into a civic ritual. Through it all, Crockett kept her public comments minimal. She tweeted a single line, "Dignity always," and returned to committee work. That restraint only amplified her image as a steady hand in a chaotic era. By contrast, the senator's continued attempts at damage control drew ridicule. Each new statement looked like backpedaling, each appearance a reminder of the confrontation she had lost. Late-night monologues cemented the public perception. One comedian quipped, "It's like bringing a knife to a chess match," as the audience roared with laughter. Another said, "We just watched a masterclass in patience and a meltdown in real time." Hashtags from the shows trended overnight, feeding back into the daytime news cycle. By the weekend, the hearing had transcended politics, becoming a cultural touchstone. Commentators compared it to famous televised moments that shifted public opinion, from debates to hearings to historic speeches. Pundits speculated about Crockett's future, some whispering about higher office. Supporters circulated a short video titled "From Kitchen Table to Congress," blending her backstory with the viral clip to create a cinematic narrative of triumph. And yet, amid the chaos, one powerful message emerged.
The chamber finally exhaled. What had begun as a clash of personalities, of entitlement versus earned authority, transformed into something far larger, a lesson in the enduring power of dignity. Crockett's measured response, her deliberate patience, had not only dismantled her opponent's attacks, but illuminated a universal truth. Courage paired with integrity resonates louder than arrogance, and service outweighs ego every time. The debate was no longer a political skirmish. It was a moral showcase, a reminder that principles, when acted upon consistently, can reshape narratives and inspire millions. As she straightened in her chair, Crockett seemed almost unaware of the historical weight of the moment. She didn't raise her hands in triumph or offer a smug smile. Instead, she exhaled quietly, her gaze sweeping the room, connecting for a moment with everyone who had witnessed the spectacle. Each journalist, each aide, each family streaming the hearing from a living room suddenly understood this was not about one person winning an argument. It was about reclaiming the meaning of public service, reminding the nation that leadership is rooted in responsibility, empathy, and courage. Outside the chamber, the ripples continued. Social media feeds overflowed with praise, with commentary that transcended politics. People of all ages, backgrounds, and identities shared the clip not merely as entertainment, but as validation of their own experiences. Immigrant communities recognized themselves in her calm authority. Students tweeted about how they would approach challenges differently after watching her poise. Activists described the moment as galvanizing, proof that perseverance and moral clarity could triumph over cynicism and manipulation. Crockett's victory was not a fleeting soundbite. It had become a shared cultural milestone. The senator, in contrast, retreated behind carefully crafted statements, struggling to regain credibility. Her earlier bluster now seemed hollow, a cautionary tale of what happens when power is wielded without principle. Analysts dissected her missteps, illustrating the contrast with Crockett's deliberate, values-driven strategy. The public narrative had clearly shifted. Confidence rooted in privilege and aggression faltered under scrutiny, while authentic preparation, patience, and clarity created undeniable authority. Crockett's victory carried symbolic weight beyond the hearing room. It affirmed the power of preparation, the necessity of moral courage, and the enduring relevance of empathy in leadership. Each act she had taken, from her early community organizing to her careful legislative work, converged into a single crescendo that demonstrated how integrity amplifies influence. Her triumph was not measured in headlines or trending hashtags alone, but in the collective acknowledgement that dignity cannot be overshadowed by arrogance. In interviews following the hearing, Crockett spoke softly but with unmistakable conviction. She highlighted the human stakes behind policy, emphasizing that representation is not a privilege for the few, but a responsibility to the many. Leadership, she said, is about lifting others, giving voice to those unheard, and standing firm even when the room seems against you. These words resonated far beyond the immediate political audience. They became a rallying cry for anyone who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or silenced. The crescendo of the story was not just a narrative device, it was a lived experience. Communities inspired by her poise organized forums, panels, and town halls discussing how courage in the face of adversity could reshape local and national discourse. Educators incorporated the moment into lessons about civic responsibility and ethics. The hearing became more than a political skirmish. It became a blueprint for how truth and dignity could triumph in moments of confrontation. Her moral victory was unmistakable. The room may have been filled with tension, the media buzzing with analysis, and the senator grasping for control, but the essence of leadership had been demonstrated. One individual, prepared, empathetic, and resolute, had shifted a narrative that once seemed preordained. In that moment, the chamber, the country, and millions watching felt the quiet but undeniable force of integrity prevailing over ego, service over spectacle, and truth over manipulation. As the hearing concluded, the final note lingered, a testament not only to Crockett's skill, but to the enduring principle that dignity is stronger than hate, and commitment to others outlasts the fleeting satisfaction of personal triumph. The audience understood that this was more than a political victory. It was a moral one, a model for the kind of leadership that the nation so desperately needed. And that leads us to one last, crucial takeaway.
The moment had arrived, and the story of Lisa Murkowski pointing to Jasmine Crockett's political career, only to be met with a calm, decisive rebuttal, had reached its unforgettable climax. What viewers witnessed was more than a debate. It was a lesson in resilience, preparation, and the enduring power of dignity. Crockett didn't just defend herself. She defended the principle that leadership belongs to those who earn it through integrity and service, not entitlement or arrogance. The chamber may have held its breath, but the nation exhaled with recognition. Courage paired with moral clarity can shift the course of history. For anyone watching, the takeaway is clear. Moments of conflict are inevitable, but how we respond defines our legacy. Standing firm in your values, preparing meticulously, and letting truth guide your words can transform opposition into opportunity. Crockett's example reminds us that one person, acting with conviction and empathy, can inspire millions and ignite a movement that transcends politics. Now it's your turn to be part of that movement. Share this story with friends, family, and your community. Engage in the conversations it sparks. Let it remind you that your voice matters, that your actions resonate, and that standing up for what is right is always worth the effort. Subscribe to stay connected to stories that highlight courage, identity, and justice in action. Hit the notification bell to follow each moment as it unfolds, because in a world dominated by spectacle, these are the stories that empower, inspire, and remind us that dignity always wins. The debate is over, but the conversation and the change continues. Be part of it, witness it, and carry the lesson forward.